Jurassic James, and on this Jurassic James Explains, we're looking at Triceratops. Now, today's topic is a request or in honor of Jack, who has a birthday on March 2nd, and his uncle Rory, who actually came to the tour with me, and I met him a couple weeks ago. So we're doing Triceratops, his favorite dinosaur. Same rules apply, oldest to newest models, and I'll start, with, of course, with this guy here with the British Museum. Now, one thing about Triceratops was it was officially discovered in 1889 here in North America, and the British Museum was, even though paleontology was growing in Europe, the British Museum made these models basically in, I think, in the 70s. And this is kind of the idea of Triceratops. It's kind of like the almost bell curve, the horns here. The big deal with this is Ceratopsians, or horned dinosaurs, are found only in North America and Asia. They're already found as to date in Europe or the Southern Hemisphere. So kind of a big deal. Now this one, of course, is I don't judge the models with today's knowledge. What I'm saying is, when they made it at the time, the data they had, this is the best example of the animal. So it's of course the frill is too small, the feet are different, but the idea is that they got the idea out there, and I think this may be one of the first Triceratops toys. One of my first Triceratops toys is this guy here. Now, in all honesty, my original figure, I have no idea where it is, but this is a model of the same one. It's like the Marx design. And again, Triceratops was initially thought to be like an elephant with, a dinosaurian elephant with the three horns and frill. That's actually kind of interesting analogy, because Triceratops' body, like mass-wise, is about the same size as a bull African elephant. The difference is, of course, it has a longer tail than an elephant, and his head is like 10 feet long. It's like a third of the animal's body, right? But overall, this model, again, I won't go into much detail because it's not showing all the features. But it's out there. It's a representation. It's in that little tin pack you get like the grocery store. But the first or oldest Triceratops models I have that are more scientifically accurate are these guys here. Now, what's really cool about these Carnegie figures is the horns gotta go up. Now, one thing to point out that's really, we're gonna see it again and again. Sometimes they have like the brow horns going up, and then like the nose horn like going up as well, like this or like that. That wouldn't work because evidence suggests that they would actually lock horns and fight. And if the horns are like this, you can't get together. So that's really nice. They're all in the same direction. But what's really also cool is studying Triceratops, how they develop over time from hatchling to adult. The horns start with little nubs, and if they go kind of up, and then if they get older, they go forward like this, basically. So that actually shows this would technically probably be a sub-adult or a juvenile Triceratops, not a full adult. Anyway, kind of cool thing. And again, I have multiple models here. There are several repaints behind me of the same models, but here's the main storytellers. Now, this one here is one that people will often, most people who review these models and toys would just, destroy it. And I get it. It's the least accurate one here. The mouth is giant. There's no cheeks to hold the food in. There's not really a beak. The horns are kind of like doing this. They're going, and the nose horns are going right in the middle. The tail's too long, so everything's kind of wrong with the animal. But it has enough features, or diagnostic features, to say Triceratops. So I always tell kids, if this is the only one you have, appreciate it, because it's the only one you have. So But my first Triceratops larger model is this guy here, and I remember this one in the 80s. And basically, the horn's missing because our dog Tyson, I remember distinctly being a very, very young child, and he had it in his mouth, and I was pulling it out of his mouth. The horn of the toy has the same texture. I think it's like a dog chew toy or rawhide. Anyway, so this bigger model, one thing to point out is that the pattern of the skin. Many people will put on their models elephantine skin because not until really recently have we found Triceratops skin. And where reptile scales overlap, like roof tile, dinosaur scales are side by side. The difference is, and again, they didn't know this when they made this figure, so I don't judge them, but know that the scales are usually pentameral or hexagonal. The belly has small rectangles, the side has small circles, and then the back scales are pentameral, hexagonal, and usually have a lot of small ones and like a really big one with small ones around it, basically. So again, I can't fault them for that, but I will point out that the horns, again, they're going straight on the brow, and then one's going kind of up. These little notches here, when they're younger, they're a little bigger, and as they get older, they more reabsorb. So still pretty neat though, and it's a very iconic part of the animal. The fact that the vertebra curve here, that's really good, because a lot of times people don't realize the neural spines, little bumps you have in your backbone, they are taller right here in Triceratops, so it would have actually done that. The tail is too long, which is ironic because I always complain about the tails being too short on these toys, but the one group that's not okay with is the Ceratopsians, because they actually have shorter tails and thicker tails. Because why? Their center of mass is different than most dinosaurs. I mean, a Tyrannosaurus standing and its legs are here, tail out, head out. You need to balance in some ways, or move, or muscle attachments. Ceratopsians don't need all of that because they have their centralized here. One thing to point out too is that the neck, what would be a neck, the torso just continues. It just goes from the torso, the chest, and then into the neck. Ceratopsians do have very thick necks. Triceratops in particular have a huge frill, huge head, and kind of moving around. But there's still a neck though. This is just like a tube for the animal. Anyway, so 1993 rolls out, and I already did a video on the Jurassic Park Ceratopsian figures, so I'm not going to go over this in too much detail. But this one here, this gal, is the one that's in the movie. Ironically, the figure has been elongated. People often look at Ceratopsians kind of like rhinoceros. I mean, as far as lifestyle or characteristics, that could be kind of understood. But as far as appearance, no. Triceratops is a very round body. Dr. Walker once said it's like a beach ball with legs. The ribs arch out like this. So this is more like a rhinoceros with dinosaurian rhinoceros. What I do like are the fact that there are smaller scales and bigger scales. Now the pattern you're seeing here is not quite evident in the one because it's kind of more random. But again, the idea of there being smaller and larger scales, we see it in Ceratopsian, not only Triceratops but their cousin skin. One thing to point out too is that what I love is that the Jurassic Park line, you have a human figure and a baby dinosaur. Now, in general, when I was a kid, your baby dinosaurs were just the smaller adult figures, right? So you have different sizes, they're different ages. But the truth is, of course, the babies start off with these tiny little frills. The horns are like nubs, and as they develop, they get bigger and bigger. And they actually did that for the toys in the Jurassic Park line initially. So this guy here, another example of this. This one has it's kind of weird. It has elephant-like skin, the wrinkles and things, but still the scutes basically. So they're not sure to go with this. But again, when you look at these guys' heads, they're if you strip away the horns and frills, Triceratops or any dinosaur really they're archosaurs. They still that's design, but sometimes the head's really really different. So an example I can give you is that the face, like Triceratops has a beak. And people think of Ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, as having horns, but remember, not all of them had horns. Some of the early ones did not. But also what's important is that there's a bone called the rostrum. So, you look at the profile, it's a part to go out longer, it's like a beak. So it's the rostrum. And only Ceratopsians have that in the entire fossil record of life on Earth that we know of. And so the idea is that the nose horn's here, and it just terminates. The truth is it should go out, basically. I do like that the nostrils are going forward. The nasal part, the nares, the hole where the nose, is right here in the skull, but there will be soft tissue taking it to the very tip of the nose. So Dr. Larry Oatmer actually did that research on that topic. The next one I have is this guy here. This one, I assume for engineering purposes, is really wide and bulky. It's one of the electronicals that roars and the eyes light up because, but so it's really, really bulky and wide. But also note, if you were just to kind of truncate it more, it would make more sense because for a 30-foot animal, it had a 10-foot skull. At this point, I want to mention that there are two species of Triceratops. When it was first discovered in 1889, we didn't know that there were horned dinosaurs, meaning that paleontology starts in Europe, and most of Europe fossils are either late or mid-Jurassic or European dinosaurs, are mid-Jurassic or early Cretaceous. So the idea is that you don't really see horned dinosaurs there. So when paleontology went to the North America, the East Coast, and further into the Western area, we find Triceratops between Texas and Canada, particularly Alberta and Saskatchewan. So that region between there is where we find Triceratops. A concentration of them being in South Dakota, Wyoming, that area there. So the idea of having horned dinosaurs, when they first discovered them, Marsh thought they were actually a descendant of Stegosaurus. And you say that's kind of weird, but remember, there's very few dinosaurs. We don't know all the families we know today. So in only finding fragments of the skull, you see, bits of horn and things, he assumed that it had spikes and plates and tails too, but it turns out no, it's a whole different group altogether. Well, there were, I think, like 16 species of Triceratops at one point, until the 1980s, when Osterman and other scientists got together and said, no, there's only two, actually only one species, Hortus. Now we have two that we recognize. If you see the horns going kind of like this, and the nose horn there, that's Hortus, Triceratops hortus. If you see the horns going straight out, and the nose horn being bigger, that's I can't say his name. P-R-O-R-S-U-S. Prorus. So those are two different species that are recognized. So the idea here is that a lot of these guys, I would say, if I were playing with them, I would separate them out by the horn shape like that, right? And also, you say, how do you know those aren't two different species? That's a great question. But you remember the actual time scale. So Triceratops live only in the Cretaceous period, right? Not the Jurassic or Triassic, only Cretaceous period. And within the Cretaceous period, the late Cretaceous, and within that, the Maastrichtian, the very, very last bit. So the last like 2 million years, Cretaceous period, we have Triceratops. In that subdivision, you have where Hortus was, we think, was the first stage, and then Hortus replaced it over time. So it evolved into the other one. Whereas in some species of other dinosaurs, we'll see one group and then they kind of branch in different groups. We see this one genus kind of changing over time. So that's one of the reasons that they're from slightly different time frames. Now, Jurassic Park 2 comes out, The Lost World, and Triceratops is going to play a big role in the movie. So you have this one figure here. Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, for me, given the size and shape, I would assume it's a juvenile. But one thing to point out too is that the horns, at least, are all going the same direction. So I like that a lot. And if you look at the back, you can see that, again, the bigger scale, smaller scale, but it's still kind of like elephantine, skin, right? And the baby, of course, is same rules apply. And the babies are actually super accurate, so that's really kind of cool. Now, this guy here is another one of the cheaper ones you can find out there. I want to point out the feet with Triceratops. This one has 4 fingers and 4 toes. So Triceratops has 4 hind limbs. In fact, the toes are very rare. We don't find toe bones usually in paleontology because they get washed away or scavenged. Triceratops has 4 toes, but again, they don't have essentially this one. They don't have these 4. The difference is they only kind of like walk on 3. We find tracks of Ceratopsians, other horned dinosaurs, and we think of Triceratops tracks. And it seems that the 4th toe didn't quite touch the ground, so it's like a 3-toe footprint. The front, they actually have 5 digits. The first 3 have claws on them and are for walking on. The last 2 have no claws and like nubs. So again, you look at Triceratops, think like this. It's walking like that with the claws on these 3, and then a nub there. So it should be 5 digits on the hand, 4 on the toe. This has 4 and 4, and they're often given elephant-like feet. And again, I don't want to judge them in the past because we didn't have the feet. But you see a big animal size of an elephant, you assume that. But that's the problem, is that people want to kind of add in, well, we see this today, let's add it in. Triceratops and elephants are similar in size, but they're totally different animals, right? But anyway, moving on, we have this guy here, which another one, like I said, this one, not terrible. It's one of the ones that are, kind of generic. Now, the skin, of course, is elephant-like, but again, at the time it was made in the late 90s, we didn't know that. There's 4 toes and 4 fingers. I didn't realize it was weird to people because humans have 5 toes. When some dinosaurs have less of one or the other, people freak out. I didn't realize that was a thing. But anyway, I like that this one. To me, this one would be like a sub-adult too, because the little notches here are kind of like reabsorbing. One thing with the stance, Triceratops has always been depicted. I think like before time, Sarah and her dad, their arms like this. The arms are uniquely oriented, but based on footprints, they're held under the body, basically. So even though the elbow kind of goes out a little bit, it's not like a reptile like this. It's still kind of like walking like that, right? And the feet are, of course, directly under the hips. We know that from footprints, from the anatomy, everything's there. And Safari got in the game and made their own baby, not Triceratops, which is really great because it has 4 fingers, 4 toes. So the hands are kind of weird. The 4 clawed fingers. It should only have 3 clawed fingers, but there's the little nubs there. It's really good. Now, this guy's really cool because there's a 4-pack that's in most museum gift shops, and the horns kind of go here. It's like this guy, a Diplodocus, I think, a Baryonyx together, not living in the same time period. They're just packed together. But these guys, the horns going up like this is what you would see in an adolescent Triceratops, that they would be pointing upwards like that. And as they get older, the horns would then go forward. So that's kind of really cool. And it has 4 toes, but anyway, I'm gonna go over that. So this guy here, I remember in KB Toys, in the mall's kids were like Amazon in person. So this guy here, basically, I was looking for at the time with a large Triceratops. And on that same note, herding. Other Ceratopsians, horned dinosaurs, we find in large herds, or at least find remains of large groups. Again, the taphonomy person who studies between death and fossilization says that they all live together, or were they all dying and being, flooded into an area together? That we don't know. But Triceratops doesn't seem to show those same characteristics. We don't see large Triceratops. Now, one thing to point out is that one, they're a larger animal. They're the largest ceratopsian. And so maybe the bigger the animal, the more space, the more calories it needs. So the idea is that you would have smaller herds, not huge herds, right? Anyway, so the feet, again, are very, very elephant-like, very short. In fact, I didn't mention this earlier. South Dakota, Wyoming, today, the Badlands, hard rock, right? Dirt and soil. In Cretaceous period, it's like Louisiana. It's or Texas Gulf Coast. It's very muddy. So Tyrannosaurus Rex and Triceratops, who are often seen together because they're in the same time period, they have longer toes because they're walking in mud and they're not sinking in, right? Whereas Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus and Stegosaurus have very tightly packed feet because where they live, it's like a giant floodplain and it's harder around, so they can walk on that and not sink in. So seeing these elephant-like toes is kind of weird because these guys living in swamps. You say, but James, elephants live in can live in swampy areas too. It's not their preferred spot. They go to watering holes. They don't hang out in swamps, right? So again, the tail's too long, but I like the fact that the scales they're not perfect. They get the point across given the time. So I like that a lot too. Anyway, so 97 rolls around. We have 2001, I believe. So this one is a Triceratops, and I've often used my main example. It will be a porous because the horns go up like this. The nose wants to be bigger, but again, overall, it has 4 toes and it has 5 toes on the front, but they're all clawed. That's incorrect. But again, the one thing I want to point out here is there's that beak, and then there are the cheek. I mentioned this earlier, did I? Oh yeah, for the first guy, this other guy, they have teeth all the way to the end of the beak. That is incredibly wrong. I see a lot of really cheap Triceratops with teeth all the way around. They had them in the cheeks to grind the food. And again, Ceratopsians are competing with hadrosaurs, duckbills. Duckbills are like the best chewing animals of the Cretaceous period. They're very efficient, they get the food down, they're migrating constantly, and you're competing with that. So Ceratopsians have a different system of chewing, and particularly their teeth wear different ways to allow that, right? So this guy, the teeth, you can't see them, but they will be like right in there. And again, the big beak for chomping and crushing. We don't know exactly what plants Triceratops ate to date because we find some dinosaur coprolites or herbivores that have like the bark and stuff in them. The teeth don't quite tell us what exactly yet. Anyway, so then we have this guy here, which is one of the I think the safari bigger figures. It has the horns kind of spread out. So I like the fact you can see the back of the neck right here. The importance of that is there are some Triceratops with the frills bitten and ripped. So it's assumed or believed that the Tyrannosaurs will bite that to rip off the frill to get to these muscles here. Because remember, there's large muscles there to help control the head. And when you eat like chicken or turkey, what you're eating is the muscle, right? The hand, darn, it has 5 digits. That's correct. But only 3 should have a claw. So that's incorrect there. The feet have 4. And so they're all on the ground as well. So again, you're seeing this kind of pattern over and over again. You're saying, James, why are you nitpicking this? Because I have like 50 Triceratopses and like all but like 3 of them are wrong. Jurassic Part 3 comes out, and again, I've always made clear my dissatisfaction with their toys. One with the opening wound that doesn't heal, but again, you have a trike here that it can still roar after all those years. Let's see, the feet are still, it's 4 clawed. Yeah, 4 and 4. So I think part of this is that a toy maker does it, and all the other toy makers copy them. So, for example, the Dilophosaurus from Jurassic Park has a fake neck frill and spits venom. So now every Dilophosaurus toy that's not made by science companies or science-influenced companies have that same frill, right? So, again, overall, this one's pretty good. It hits all the major points, so not terrible. The tail is actually good because most of the tails I didn't show earlier, but they should be shorter. They're very like thin and rat-like. The tail should be actually thinner, making it even look more stubby. So I also didn't tell you that when they first found Triceratops, it was thought to be like a bison, basically, because again, no one knew what Ceratopsians were. So moving forward, we're getting to the more accurate-ish models. So again, the toes are still wrong, but this one, the feet, the inner toe is actually off the ground. So this one is really cool. Who is this again? This is Safari, I believe. Yep, Safari 1997. 2007. So the hands are still wrong. There's still 5 digits with claws on the ground. It should only be 3, but there's the 2 claws kind of pulled there. Here I went to the Perot Museum. I don't know who this model is. I can find it online what it was, but museum in Dallas. But they had this one here. The tail's too long, but overall, the head. What I like about the head is it's large, but it doesn't look like an Archosaur head. It looks very different. and there are no cheeks. It should have cheeks, because when you're chewing food, if you have no cheeks, it falls out of your mouth and you die, you fail. 4 fingers, 4 toes. So again, that's a pretty standard issue at this point in the not correct models. Caught that. So moving forward, we get to the one I promote, I think the most at this point. We have the Papo. So a lot of the Papo figures are based on the Jurassic Park book, basically. I do like that it has, the small scales and large scales. Again, the pattern you're seeing here, we don't know that for true. We see it's more random in some situations. The feet are actually missed it by that much, did we? Yeah. So the hind limbs have the 3 toes on the ground and one little, kind of like dew claw. That's good. There's 3 main claws, and the side toes are on the side, but I don't think there's claws. So that's actually correct then. So because there's 3 main claws, like I mentioned earlier, and then there's this little, what's the find there? You can see there's a little 2 nubs there. They don't have a claw on them, or don't appear to. Well, on that side. On this side, they have claws. Okay, sure. So here we have a baby, and again, it's based on the research of Jack Horner and his colleagues about the babies having small frills. And again, this is not something that should be like ground shattering. The idea that an animal in an egg doesn't have long horns, an animal that's not reproducing yet, being a baby, it has these features. It should have a reduced form when it hatches, and then as it gets older, it gets bigger horns and whatever, right? It's like our humans, for example, as we get older, either our voices change and we start growing hair and all that. Same thing here, just a different design, captured in bone. This one I think is one of my favorites models of Triceratops. It's like the most complete, I believe. It's Safari 2018, and again, it's a hortus because the horns are going more forward, smaller nose horn. I think they're like respecting the idea that there's different species. The feet or the forelimbs have the 3 claws and the 2, so that's actually super correct. The scales, oh wow, that's actually really good. So what you're seeing is that the scales are around laying flat, and there are bigger ones every so often, a little nodule on them, which we see. The one in the museum in Houston, the really big scale with a bump on it, that one we think has a feather out of it, but it's not published. So carry on. The feet are correct because they have the 3 main toes, and then the other one's kind of pulled away, so it shouldn't leave a footprint, right? The tail's short. It should be a little bit thicker. It should be a little taller, but overall, it's a pretty good model. Then, of course, there's always the ones getting these like 8 packs. So this guy, I mean, what's really neat, and what I want you to take away from this series, is the idea of diagnostic features. That there are certain characteristics, and again, in paleontology, in science, we have all these papers that define all these things. But when you see a figure that has enough features to say it is a Triceratops. So like this little thing here is not super accurate, but it has enough of the features to go like, yeah, it's a Triceratops, right? We hope in time that the models get more and more accurate, but we can't, depend on that. Anyway, so this one, I saw this at the museum's birthday party. The department had this one on one of the display tables, and I had never seen or heard of this model, the company or whatever. And my colleague Lindsay and Karen actually got this for me as a gift. So there's no writing on it. It just says his name and made in China. But I mean, or everyone else here. But the idea here is that it's this really large model that I didn't know about, and it seems to be, my guess would be late 80s to early 90s as far as the design goes. But not only the design, the general build of it, but the horns, the frills should be bigger in this model. The horns do kind of tip down, so that's what you would see in the hortus, which is the most well-known, most observed genus. The arm, so we have 5 fingers and 4 toes. So the 4 toes have been consistent the entire time. That's great. Wait, this one has 5 toes, but everyone else has had like 4 toes. That's really good. This is the hands that are really getting messed up a lot. But what's really cool on the belly that people don't realize, I mentioned before that the belly has the rectangular scales. There are rectangle scales here. On the sides, there are small circles. Now, this little line here there's one scale pattern, nothing here. We don't know that for sure. We do see in many dinosaurs what's called counter shading, where it's darker on the top, lighter on the bottom, thing with sharp, basically. So that's really cool too. And of course, the beak is right there, so that's really brilliant. And the nostrils, I would only suggest be slightly more to the front. Now we get into the world of Jurassic World, and I have I think 3 or 4 of this guy. I was semi-disappointed because supposedly the Jurassic World Dominion line should have, not Dominion, the one before that, should have had the toys be more like to scale to each other. But Triceratops is a larger Ceratopsian, so the other ones sometimes are bigger than it. So I'm not sure that works there. But overall, you're seeing essentially an adult Triceratops with. There should be more of these on the frill. The hands and feet are more elephantine. It has 5 toes and fingers, and 5 toes, 5 fingers. What's weird is the hands, like the middle are the biggest, longest. They kind of go back from there. As we said earlier, it's like this. But overall, the tail is pretty thick. It should have ended right there. Like if it ended right there, that would have been great. And it should be more rounded. The body should be more like beach ball round. But overall, it's a pretty neat figure. But again, not super accurate. And again, historically, I would have said this is a juvenile. But again, the horns are well too developed. The skull's pretty decent actually, and the hands have 5 and 4. So at least they're consistent, and they're consistent in that area. But what I most find disappointing with the Jurassic World line is that these are the babies. So they just put smaller adult models with the humans. So they put the babies of them. But again, we all know now the babies have small horns, small frills, these like that, right? And the last one that I have to point out here are these guys. So these are like the doll store, groups. And overall, interesting models. Like again, this one has teeth in its beak, which is not how it works. It does have the bell curve here, like that. That's really nice. And actually, the tail is pretty decent. It should be maybe a little shorter, but it's pretty decent. Actually, no, that's pretty good actually. 4 toes and 5 fingers, 4 fingers. So that's consistent on the incorrect of the hand. But overall, you see what it is. It's there isn't this like boss shape right here. Like it's an archosaur. Anyway. And finally, this little guy here, this one has the classical, Triceratops look. Now, what's the big deal about this guy? Where does he live? Who are his cousins? It is a Chasmosaurian ceratopsian, meaning that the Chasmosaurs, I mentioned on several videos at this point, are the ones that have bigger brow horns, usually smaller nose horns, and their frills are more rectangular. And the Centrosaurs are the ones that have usually bigger nose structures, smaller brow horns, and more rounded frills. Well, Triceratops is a Chasmosaurian, but it has a more rounded frill, but it trumps all of them by having a solid frill. Meaning that the term for this, I have trouble saying it, fenestrated. Fenestra means window in French. So if you look at most Ceratopsians, they have these big frills, but there's like a frame of bone and there's holes in the middle of the actual skeleton. Triceratops is the only Ceratopsian of a certain size and certain shape that has a solid frill like that. So, in perspective, who does Triceratops live with, and who are his neighbors, right? And the answer, of course, is the Hell Creek Formation in particular is made popular because we have Triceratops there, and of course it lives with T-Rex. Now, I would say the top 5 dinosaurs, well, until 6, because Velociraptor, but T-Rex, Triceratops, Stegosaurus, the quote Brontosaurus or Brachiosaurus, long neck, those are very popular dinosaurs. And Triceratops and T-Rex are the only 2 of that group that live together. So T-Rex and Triceratops, or late Cretaceous North America, together, same environment. We find bite marks of T-Rex and Triceratops bones. We find trike bones and T-Rex poop. They're living together. Stegosaurus is in Jurassic period. The raptor is in Cretaceous, but Asia. So that's why these 2 are so always seen together in museums and movies and stuff, because they're actually contemporaries. Now, the image you have in your mind, and every museum has, of a Triceratops and T-Rex lining up to fight each other, that is something that's more fictional. It probably happened several times, but the idea here is, if you look at animals today, the lion, the big lion, doesn't go towards the buffalo every time. They're looking for baby buffalo, looking for gazelle, looking for something smaller. So the idea of these 2 titans like Godzilla and Ghidorah attacking each other and fighting, that's very rare. In fact, we see with Tyrannosaurs, we find juvenile duckbills, dinosaurs that were, adult duckbills, like and Montosaurus, that have injuries on them that happened when they were young and they healed. Meaning that the Tyrannosaurus is attacking a healthy animal, not a dead animal, and that also it got away and it healed. And so the idea is that we would assume that T-Rex, or at least it would stand to reason that T-Rex would obviously be hunting juvenile Triceratops and young ones. Now, obviously, if you go after the juveniles, the adults will respond. But the idea again of an adult T-Rex and adult Triceratops lining up to fight, predators don't want to get hurt, so it wouldn't happen. That's why we think Ceratopsians. I mean, the first assumption was fighting. You know, horns and frills for fighting. That's essentially swords and shields, right? But the truth is, if we saw that, we would say all Ceratopsians have the same design for the most part, and they all have very different horns and frills. So we're thinking that it's also display and mate selection and all that. But back to the narrative. We have our Triceratops, we have our Tyrannosaurus, we have an Edmontosaurus. In the air, it's Quetzalcoatlus, our pterosaur, and we have, of course, Pachycephalosaurus. Now, are there raptors in the environment? Are there, not Velociraptor, but other raptors? Are there oviraptors found there too? Yes. But last but not least, I want to point out a cousin of Triceratops called, this is not the scale, Torosaurus. So it's been suggested by Dr. Jack Horner and others that Triceratops is a juvenile of Torosaurus. This is based on the idea that if you look at the bone texture, the histology study of bones, that animals that are like adults have more solid packed bones, and then juveniles, they're more like open, because they're growing fast and then they're repairing quicker. I mean, imagine a kid hurts themselves, they heal faster than someone like my age. Well, the idea is that what makes the theory hard to argue is that in order to do this, you must cut open and destroy bones, and museums are super not into destroying bones. But the idea, of course, is that again, not to scale, that the Triceratops would go from a round frill to a long frill. And I mentioned this before in my Stg Moloch, Dracorex, and Pachycephalosaurus video. I had a video just on that topic, but again, it doesn't quite line up with these two guys. They're fighting around the same spots, same environment, same time, so it makes sense that would be thought. But again, they're super individual animals, and I believe there are juvenile Torosaurs known. So, and Triceratops is huge, so it's like the bigger of the two animals. So, you know, you wouldn't have this giant body and then it's smaller, you know. So that's why, again, we have science and we're debating ideas. But again, in the main point, this is Triceratops in a nutshell. I could talk for another 40 minutes on this animal, but the video's gone over. So with that being said, I will see you guys later, and thank you for tuning in.